Yes, my name is Winnie KHAEMBA. I'm a research fellow at the African Center for Technology Studies. And the African Center for Technology Studies is an intergovernmental research and policy analysis think tank that is based in Nairobi. So we do research, we do policy analysis, we do capacity building, and we also do technology brokerage, looking at sustainable development in Africa. And we work within 5 program areas: the Climate Resilient Economies Program, the Gender, Youth and Inclusive Development Program, the Bioeconomy Program, the Information Economy Program, and the Responsible Natural Resources Programs. Yeah, I think the agreement, the Paris Agreement, by and large has taken into consideration the different interests of African countries and generally least developed countries as well as developing countries. The extent to which it has taken all these into account is what is the point of contention. For example, there is a recognition in the Paris Agreement on the different capacities that developing countries and least developing countries have. There is also a recognition of the need for finances, the need for capacity, the need for technology transfer to help developing countries, and especially the least developing countries, to actually adapt to as well as mitigate climate change impacts. So yes, to a degree, different impediments by African countries have actually been captured in the Paris Agreement. Yeah, but of course, in terms of operationalizing the agreement, then a lot of work will need to go into the whole architecture and framework of how these operates in real sense. Yeah, it really is an important issue about the whole dynamics of changing the global economy, because when we look at the global economy, most of it is actually focused on fossil fuels. But what the Paris Agreement is proposing, and what a lot of countries are now advocating for, is a move away from fossil fuels to focus on renewable energy, which emits less greenhouse gases. So the focus now is on renewable energy. Talk of geothermal energy, which a lot of countries, including Kenya, have invested heavily in geothermal. There is solar energy. Morocco in Africa has invested heavily in solar energy. There is wind energy. A lot of African countries are again investing in wind energy, including South Africa, Kenya, and other countries which are moving towards renewable. So there is need for an actual push towards renewables across the whole world. Germany has really done a good job in going towards a renewable energy pathway, and different countries have to actually follow this path because it is less carbon intensive as compared to fossil fuels. So the whole world really needs to move towards low carbon development, which is what the Paris Agreement is trying to advocate for. But countries, of course, have to meet their own obligations as indicated in their communication to the UNFCCC as they sign on to the Paris Agreement. This information, of course, will be contained in the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs submitted by countries, which have specific targets about how countries plan to mitigate. So I'm sure that will be one of the key issues they address, the issue of renewable energy as one of the pathways in which they can cut their greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, obviously, financing is a very key aspect in terms of implementing the Paris Agreement. So you have different countries who have submitted who will be submitting their nationally determined contributions, and to actualize, they will need a substantial amount of funding to do this. Most of these countries, of course, are constrained in terms of resources. And the Paris Agreement, of course, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change lays out a financial mechanism. There is a Green Climate Fund where different countries can access climate finance. So there needs to be a lot of effort now to capacity build African governments and different organizations to actually get accredited to the Green Climate Fund, and also to apply for project financing to the Green Climate Fund, so that they can be able to access these funds for both adaptation, mitigation, and then also for capacity building to be able to combat climate change impacts. In my opinion, I think there are three clear areas where think tanks have a critical role they can play. Number one is in the research field. There is, of course, limited research in terms of what exactly are the priority areas, what exactly are the local specific impacts, and think tanks need to play this role by doing research that informs on what the issues are at a particular local level in these countries, and how the local authorities, the communities, and also the national government can prioritize so that they are able to actually respond to those issues, sort of looking at it from an evidence-based perspective, so that the responses are well coordinated and linked with the actual interests of the people who are already impacted by climate change. And then the other issue that ties in with research, of course, is making accessible all the research data and information that is already available. So trying to create a platform where all these knowledge and information can actually be used and utilized, so that it can inform decision making, policy making, as well as implementation of climate change action. The other area is, of course, policy analysis. Think tanks need to look at the different policies in Africa. So what does the national policy of a particular country, for example, say? What does it have in place as its climate change policy framework, and how does that link, for example, to the Paris Agreement? How does it link to its commitments under the Paris Agreement, and how does this even link to Sustainable Development Goals? So being able to make these linkages and sort of helping governments come up with a coherent way in which all these issues are interlinked, so that you have a more coherent response, and ensuring that there are no overlaps, or ensuring that the different policies do not conflict, would really be an area that think tanks can actively play a role. And then the other one is, of course, capacity building. There are a lot of capacity gaps. Governments, officials have different capacity needs that think tanks can actually help to bridge. For example, think tanks can work directly with negotiators, African negotiators, who have already formed themselves into a group. So they can work closely with them to ensure that these negotiators understand what the key issues are, and come up with a sort of very, very deliberate and well-informed approach on how they can be able to negotiate the climate change negotiations. So that sort of capacity, as well as building the capacity of local institutions and communities to understand and to respond to climate change in the different countries, I think. Yeah, so those three are the major areas where I think think tanks can play a critical role. I'm expecting that this particular summit comes up with really concrete, sort of actionable way forward, where think tanks can pick up and move forward. I'm expecting that I'm actually quite certain that this has not just been a talk shop, that we've actually come up with some concrete ideas that different think tanks can pick on and then go and work on. We've talked about issues of trade, we've talked about issues of sustainable development, we've talked about issues of climate change, and we've talked about sustainability of think tanks. And I think throughout the sessions we've had really practical things that think tanks can do So it's up to us, people from different think tanks, to pick on some of these recommendations and ideas and actually implement them, make them actionable, and just move forward, because that is when we can be able to make a solid impact and influence different processes as think tanks.